The ocean will rise, the east coast will sink. Cayce Prophecy 2025. Welcome to The Journey of Wisdom, a space where ancient insight meets the urgency of today. In this series, we uncover prophecies not as forgotten relics, but as living truths, messages once whispered through time, now rising again in the form of nature's unrest and human uncertainty. The tides are shifting not only across our coastlines, but within the collective spirit of humanity. The ocean no longer laps gently at our shores, it crashes with warning. The earth rumbles beneath our feet, not in chaos, but in remembrance, as if the planet itself is trying to speak. We live in a time when the future is no longer distant. Prophecies once brushed off as symbolic or strange are now mirroring our reality: rising sea levels, fractured lands, and a society bracing for impact. But this isn't about fear, it's about awareness. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, spoke of great changes of waters rising and lands disappearing. But he also spoke of transformation, of a new consciousness rising alongside the waves. In this episode we ask, what if these changes aren't punishments, but invitations? What if the Earth's voice, long ignored, is calling us not to panic, but to awaken? The past is not done speaking, and here at the Journey of Wisdom, we are learning to listen. Number 1. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. Edgar Cayce was a man of paradox, a quiet soul from the rolling hills of rural Kentucky who would one day be called the sleeping prophet. He was not born into wealth or academic prestige, nor did he carry the titles of theologian or philosopher. His profession was humble, just a photographer. To the outside world, he appeared ordinary, someone you might pass by without a second glance. Yet beneath that modest exterior lived a gift so profound that it would challenge science, religion, and our understanding of human consciousness. When Cayce lay down and entered his self-induced trance states, a door opened not to dreams or fantasies, but to a vast realm of intelligence and spiritual knowing. In these altered states, he spoke in a calm, detached voice, offering insights with a clarity and authority that startled those around him. It was as if another being, another mind, was using his voice to reveal truths beyond this world. These weren't vague guesses or poetic visions. His readings were detailed, practical, and often uncannily accurate, delivered while he lay completely unaware of what he was saying. What made Cayce so extraordinary wasn't just that he could access this deeper source, it was the sheer breadth of wisdom that came through him. Over thousands of documented trance sessions, he explored a vast spiritual map that stretched far beyond his waking knowledge. He spoke about how the human body could heal itself through natural remedies, diet, and alignment with spiritual principles. He described the soul's journey across lifetimes, introducing reincarnation to an audience that, at the time, barely knew what the word meant. He spoke of Atlantis, ancient Egypt, and lost civilizations not as myths, but as places with real histories and spiritual technologies that modern humans had forgotten. And yet, despite these fascinating revelations, it was his prophecies about the Earth's future that continue to stir the deepest unease. Among Cayce's most sobering visions were those that described great upheavals in the natural world, destruction that would not come randomly, but as the result of human disconnection from spiritual truth. He foresaw oceans swallowing coastlines, the eastern seaboard of the United States shifting dramatically, and cities once thought permanent crumbling under the pressure of geological and environmental collapse. But Cayce never presented these visions as punishment. Rather, he framed them as warnings, reflections of a world out of balance, both spiritually and morally. The changes in the earth, he said, were inseparable from the state of human consciousness. If we continue to live in ways that violate natural and spiritual laws, placing materialism over compassion, selfishness over unity, the planet itself would respond, not out of vengeance, but as a necessary correction. This was the essence of Cayce's message, that human behavior and Earth's stability are intimately linked, and in that truth lies both a danger and a hope. While the prophecies are unsettling, they are also empowering because they suggest that by changing our inner world, we can affect the outer one. Cayce's visions call us not just to prepare for change, but to be the change. The rising oceans and shifting lands are not just about climate or geography. They are signs pointing us back to a forgotten harmony with the divine. They urge us to remember who we are, where we've come from, and what truly matters. Number 2. The prophecy of America's geographical transformation. Edgar Cayce's warnings about America's future weren't just predictions of disaster. They were urgent calls for awareness, responsibility, and spiritual awakening. He spoke of a coming shift that would reshape the very geography of the United States, a transformation so vast and sudden that it would leave no corner of the land untouched. But what did he really mean when he said the East Coast would sink, or that the West would break apart first? According to Cayce, this wasn't just about tectonic plates or climate change. It was about the soul of a nation losing its way. He described a chain of events, beginning with the destruction of cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, not simply damaged, but utterly dismantled, before turning to the symbolic heart of American power. In New York City, the order mattered. The fall of the West would be a warning, and New York's fate would mark a deeper reckoning. Yet Cayce never spoke with the tone of a doomsayer. He wasn't trying to terrify, he was trying to wake people up. He believed that what happens in the physical world mirrors what is happening in the spiritual world. So when we ask, why would these things happen? The answer Cayce gave was simple but profound. Because we forgot who we are, and we stopped listening to the deeper truths that connect us to the earth, to each other, and to the divine. Do you ever wonder if the earth can feel what we do? Cayce certainly did. He saw the planet not as a rock floating in space, but as a living being, conscious, aware, and deeply responsive to the energy of the people who live upon it. In his view, the land and the human spirit are inseparably linked. When a nation builds its foundation on greed instead of generosity, on control instead of compassion, the earth begins to shift. And when we ignore our spiritual nature, when materialism becomes more important than morality, the ground itself reacts. Cayce saw natural disasters not just as geological events, but as spiritual alarms. Earthquakes weren't only caused by pressure underground, they were, in his words, physical manifestations of a spiritual imbalance. Rising seas, vanishing coastlines, and broken cities were, to him, not punishments, but necessary corrections, signs that humanity had drifted too far from its spiritual center. This wasn't meant to scare us, but to inspire us to return to what matters most. He believed the earth holds memory, that it reflects the intentions, values, and collective energy of the people who inhabit it. So, what do these warnings really ask of us? They invite us to take a long, honest look at how we're living as individuals and as a society. Are we building lives based on kindness, connection, and care for the world around us? Or are we drifting into fear, division, and constant consumption, forgetting that we are part of something larger and sacred? Cayce's message reminds us that we still have a choice. These prophecies are not fixed fates, they are crossroads. And the most powerful changes we can make aren't just in governments or technologies, but in our hearts, our homes, and the way we treat each other. If the earth responds to our spirit, then healing must begin within. Perhaps the true warning isn't about sinking coastlines, but about a sinking sense of purpose, and the lesson is to rise spiritually before the oceans rise physically. Let this not be a story of destruction, but one of awakening. If we choose to remember the spiritual truths that connect us, if we live with intention, humility, and love, Then even the ground beneath our feet may find peace. What step will you take today toward a more balanced and awakened world? Number 3. The sacred link between spirit and nature. Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, shared a perspective that still challenges the way many of us see the world today. A vision where the physical and the spiritual are not separate realms, but two sides of the same truth. He taught that what we see happening in nature, whether it's an earthquake, a flood, a wildfire, or the rising of the ocean, is not just a random act of geology or weather. According to Cayce, these natural events are deeply connected to the state of our collective spirit. He believed that the Earth is alive in a way we rarely stop to consider, not just a planet of rock and water, but a living being that reflects back to us the energy we put into it. So let me ask you something. What do you think happens when humanity as a whole begins to lose touch with what is good, just, and compassionate? What happens when a society turns more toward greed than gratitude, more toward ego than empathy? Cayce said, the answer is already unfolding around us. The earth begins to shift, to groan, to cry out not in anger, but as a warning, a call to return to balance. He didn't describe nature as a punisher, but as a mirror. And what do mirrors do? They show us exactly what we are, even when we don't want to see it. This idea might feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable. We're used to thinking of earthquakes as the result of pressure underground, or rising sea levels as a symptom of melting ice caps, and scientifically, those things are absolutely true. But Cayce offered a deeper layer beneath those facts. He suggested that behind every physical event, there's a spiritual cause, a disconnection, a forgetting, a collective turning away from the divine principles that hold the world in harmony. You might be wondering, how could the spiritual choices of people really affect the earth itself? But isn't it possible, even likely, that everything is more connected than we've been taught to believe? Cayce thought so. In his view, when we stray from truth, from love, from justice, nature doesn't just carry on unaffected, it feels the weight of our misalignment. The ground trembles not just because of plates colliding, but because the very soul of humanity has drifted too far off course. And so, the message of Cayce's prophecies isn't about fearing nature, it's about finally listening to it. It's about reading the signs not just with our eyes, but with our hearts. Think about the state of the world today. Floods are becoming more frequent, wildfires more intense, the climate more unstable. Are these not the very signs Cayce spoke of? And if they are, then what are they really saying? Could they be more than environmental emergencies? Could they be sacred messages, nudges from the earth itself telling us that something in our way of living needs to change? Cayce didn't point fingers or call for panic. He offered an invitation to return to reverence, to humility, to the kind of spiritual alignment that brings not only personal peace, but planetary healing. He reminded us that the earth is not a battlefield to conquer, but a companion on the journey of the soul. Nature, he said, is our teacher, and when we are in harmony with it, we thrive. But when we turn our backs on that relationship, when we treat the earth as a resource to exploit rather than a sacred home, then the balance begins to break down, not as punishment, but as a reflection of our choices. So here's a deeper question for you to consider. What kind of world are we creating with our thoughts, our actions, and our values? Are we contributing to balance or to imbalance? Cayce believed that healing the earth begins with healing the soul, that when we begin to live with greater compassion, clarity, and connection to something higher than ourselves, the earth will respond in kind. The storms, the floods, the shifting ground, they're not just weather patterns, they're messages. And if we're willing to listen, truly listen, they can guide us not into fear, but into a deeper understanding of who we are and what we're meant to be. This is the heart of Cayce's vision, not a prophecy of doom, but a sacred call to return to alignment. And the most important question we can ask ourselves now is this: are we willing to answer that call? Because if we are, then maybe the future isn't set in stone, maybe it's still being shaped by the choices we make today. If you've watched up to this point, you're clearly curious about the powerful prophecies shaping our future. Comment below with "Rising Truth" to show you're ready to explore the deeper meaning behind Cayce's visions. Don't go anywhere, there's still more to uncover about what may lie ahead in 2025. Stay with us until the end and discover how these ancient insights might guide us in today's uncertain world. Number 4. New York and Virginia Beach Prophetic Ground Zero. To most people, Virginia Beach is simply a scenic coastal town, a place where ocean waves meet the land, where families go for vacation, and where the pace of life feels slower, gentler. But to Edgar Cayce, this wasn't just a charming seaside city. It was sacred. It was here, along this shoreline, that Cayce lived much of his life, where he meditated, gave countless readings, and received many of his most powerful visions. He believed Virginia Beach was chosen by divine guidance to become a center for spiritual awakening, a future sanctuary where people would come not just for rest, but for healing, for growth, for rediscovering their connection to the divine. In Cayce's view, it was meant to serve as a spiritual lighthouse in a time of great darkness, a place that would offer guidance when the world seemed lost. But even this blessed place, he warned, would not be spared if humanity continued to forget its spiritual responsibilities. He spoke of a time when Virginia Beach could be overtaken not only by literal rising waters from the Atlantic Ocean, but by a symbolic flood of neglected truth. Cayce wasn't just describing a flood of sea levels, but a flood of spiritual consequences. If people continue to live as though life is only about material gain, technological advancement, or personal ambition, without remembering compassion, morality, and the deeper truths of existence, then no structure, no seawall, and no amount of wealth will be able to hold back what comes next. He was clear. Even the holiest ground cannot protect a spiritually unconscious people. This wasn't a threat, it was a warning born of love, urging us to wake up and realign before it's too late. Now, contrast that with New York City, a metropolis that Cayce saw in starkly different terms. While Virginia Beach symbolized divine purpose and spiritual healing, New York represented something else entirely: humanity's pursuit of power, prestige, and progress without pause. It's a city of towering ambition, the global center of finance, media, culture, and commerce. But in Cayce's prophecies, New York became the symbol of a society that had strayed too far from its soul. He spoke of its future with sobering clarity, saying its destruction would follow that of cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, not coincidentally, but as part of a greater sequence, a divine timeline responding to spiritual imbalance. And Cayce didn't soften his words. He didn't say New York would be shaken, disturbed, or partially damaged. He said it would be destroyed, and not by war or human conflict, but by water. The Atlantic, he foresaw, would rise, not with vengeance, but with remembrance. It wouldn't be nature acting blindly, it would be nature mirroring back what we, as a collective society, had allowed ourselves to forget. The tall buildings, the glowing lights, the monuments to modern achievement, all of it, vulnerable to a force far more ancient than steel and glass. And here's what makes Cayce's warning even more poignant. He didn't point to one decision, one leader, or one moment that would cause this downfall. Instead, he warned that the fall of New York would be symbolic, a physical manifestation of a spiritual truth, a message that even the greatest among us cannot escape the consequences of forgetting our spiritual foundation. So what do we do with these visions today, in a world where rising sea levels are already being measured, where storms are stronger, where the earth is restless, and where we often find ourselves lost in the noise of consumerism and disconnection. The point isn't to live in fear. Cayce never intended that. Instead, the lesson is to look inward and ask ourselves, are we living lives that are in alignment with truth, kindness, and purpose? Are our communities grounded in love and wisdom, or distracted by speed and self-interest? Because Cayce believed deeply that the external world reflects the internal one, and that means if we want to prevent destruction, we must begin by building spiritual strength in ourselves, in our homes, and in our society. He was offering us not a vision of inevitable doom, but a path toward redemption. If Virginia Beach is a symbol of healing and New York a symbol of imbalance, then the message is clear. We still have a choice. Whether we answer that call is up to us. Number 5. Scientific evidence aligns with prophecy. Even though Edgar Cayce's predictions were rooted in spiritual insight and not in science, what's truly striking is how modern scientific research is now confirming many of the things he foresaw, not as poetic warnings, but as tangible, measurable realities. Think about that for a moment. A man who gave trance readings in the early 20th century without access to advanced data or satellite models spoke of rising waters and shifting lands, and today, agencies like NASA and NOAA are showing us that these changes are happening in real time. Sea levels have already risen over 8 inches since 1880, and nearly half of that rise has occurred just in the past 30 years. This isn't a theory anymore. It's visible. It's happening. Cayce's prophecies no longer sound like distant possibilities. They sound like our headlines. Cities like Miami, New York, Norfolk, and especially Virginia Beach, which he saw as spiritually significant, are now considered high-risk zones for permanent flooding before the century is out. And it's not just big storms we're talking about. The sea is rising inch by inch, year after year, not in dramatic waves, but in a slow, steady encroachment that scientists call sunny day flooding. Have you heard of that term before? It refers to floods that happen even when the skies are clear. No rain, no storms, just high tides quietly pushing water into streets, sidewalks, and homes. In Virginia Beach, these events are becoming more common as water creeps into people's lives without the drama of a hurricane, but with just as much significance. To those unaware of Cayce's words, it might seem like an unfortunate side effect of coastal living. But if you've been following this journey, doesn't it seem like something deeper is unfolding? Could it be that these gentle floods are actually soft warnings, the Earth's way of echoing what Cayce tried to tell us decades ago? And then there was Hurricane Sandy, a moment that felt less like a weather event and more like prophecy taking shape. In 2012, Sandy roared into the East Coast and brought New York City to its knees. Subways turned into rivers, power went out across massive sections of the city, and the water surged into places many thought untouchable. Staten Island, parts of Queens, and downtown Manhattan all experienced devastation that, for many, felt unimaginable. Over 40 lives were lost in the city, and the economic toll reached tens of billions of dollars. But beyond the statistics was something even more haunting, a sense that we were witnessing something Cayce had warned us about. No, he didn't name Sandy or give specific dates, but he described a pattern, a time when the earth would no longer be still, when water would rise not just physically but symbolically, washing over places that had grown spiritually disconnected. When you look at the way New York City was humbled by the sea, a city Cayce said would be destroyed, not by war but by water, it's hard not to feel a deeper message within the storm. And with scientists now offering data that supports these changes, we find ourselves standing in the space where prophecy meets proof. So what does this mean for us today? It means we can no longer dismiss these messages as old myths or fringe beliefs. We have the data, and we have the warning. The real question now is, are we listening? And this is where the deeper value lies, not in fearing disaster, but in using these signs as a wake-up call. Cayce's vision was never just about destruction. It was about reflection and transformation. So ask yourself, are we living in a way that respects the balance of the earth? Are our cities built with reverence or just with ambition? Are we moving through life with awareness, or are we sleepwalking into consequences? The lesson is clear. When science and spiritual insight point in the same direction, we'd be wise to pay attention. Now is not the time to turn away. Now is the time to turn inward, to realign our lives with values that honor both the planet and the soul, because healing won't come from fear, but from responsibility. And just maybe, by taking conscious steps today, we can help shift the path of tomorrow. Number 6. The looming threat of La Palma. We've seen scientific evidence supporting Cayce's prophecies about rising sea levels and climate change. But there's another, lesser-known threat, a geological event that could bring those prophecies to life in an instant: the collapse of La Palma. Off the northwest coast of Africa lies a quiet, picturesque island called La Palma, part of the Canary Islands, a place most people would associate with beauty, tranquility, and scenic landscapes. But beneath this peaceful exterior, La Palma holds a deep and very real danger that many overlook. You see, scientists have been watching the island's western slope for decades, and what they've discovered is both fascinating and frightening. That side of the island, fractured and unstable, is slowly slipping toward the Atlantic Ocean, and if it collapses all at once, which experts say is entirely possible under the right seismic or volcanic conditions, it could trigger one of the most devastating natural disasters in recorded history. We're not talking about small tremors or routine eruptions. We're talking about billions of tons of rock crashing into the sea in a matter of minutes. Now, think about what happens when a huge amount of land suddenly displaces ocean water. This kind of event would trigger a massive tsunami, but not the kind most of us picture from movies or news reports. Unlike tsunamis caused by underwater earthquakes, which radiate outward more gradually, this wave would be born from a violent thrust of Earth into ocean, producing what scientists call a mega tsunami. It would be tall, fast, and powerful, a wall of water traveling at the speed of a jetliner, racing westward across the Atlantic. Have you ever wondered how prepared we really are for something like that? Because here's the unsettling part: if La Palma's unstable flank collapses, experts estimate the east coast of the United States would be hit in just 6 to 8 hours. That's not much time. Cities like New York, Miami, Boston, Norfolk, and Virginia Beach, places already struggling with rising sea levels and increasingly unpredictable weather, could face waves between 50 and 100 feet high. Picture that for a moment. Not a slow rise, not a flood creeping in over days or weeks, but an ocean wave taller than a building slamming into the coast in the middle of the night. Millions of people would have no warning, no time, and no chance to escape. What Cayce spoke of as the sudden transformation of America's coastlines, once thought to be symbolic or metaphorical, now feels eerily possible through a purely scientific lens. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Edgar Cayce never used the word tsunami in his readings because the term wasn't widely known during his lifetime, yet he spoke of upheavals in the Atlantic, great floods overtaking cities, and dramatic changes to the eastern seaboard. His language was spiritual and metaphorical, but the descriptions align shockingly well with what modern geologists and tsunami experts fear most from a potential La Palma collapse. So how do we make sense of this convergence between prophecy and science? How is it that a man known for spiritual trance readings in the early 20th century could describe events that now sit at the forefront of geophysical concern? Whether you see it as coincidence, divine insight, or a bit of both, it leads us to a crucial question. What are we doing with this information? Are we preparing, educating, and planning, or are we simply hoping it won't happen in our lifetime? Because the truth is, La Palma is quiet, but it's not forgotten. As Cayce once said, the earth is alive, and when we stop listening to its signals, we lose the chance to respond before it acts. So maybe now is the time to take warnings seriously, whether they come from satellites or spiritual insight. Maybe it's time we realize that nature doesn't always shout sometimes. It whispers again and again, until one day it roars. Will we take action while the ocean is still calm, or will we wait until we have no choice but to react? The value here isn't in fear, it's in awareness, preparation, and remembering that the most powerful changes often begin in stillness. Still watching? That means you're ready to go beyond the surface and question what's coming. Drop Earth changes in the comments to join others who are awakening to the signs. The next few minutes might shift how you see 2025 forever. Don't miss what's next. Number 7. The sequence of prophecy, a timed warning. One of the most powerful and often overlooked aspects of Edgar Cayce's prophecy is that he didn't just offer scattered predictions. He spoke of a clear sequence, a spiritual timeline that would unfold step by step, like a series of warning bells growing louder with each strike. He wasn't describing sudden chaos out of nowhere. He was outlining a process, a rhythm of events that would escalate in intensity if humanity continued to drift away from its moral and spiritual center. Cayce specifically mentioned that cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco would fall first, before New York would face its own reckoning, not as random targets, but as parts of a divine pattern revealing itself in stages. He described these events as birth pains, a term that carries a deeper meaning, suggesting not just destruction, but the painful emergence of something new, perhaps a new consciousness, a shift in how we live and what we value. And if we take a moment to look at what's happening in the world right now, can we really say that these early groans of the earth aren't already underway? Wildfires in California are no longer seasonal inconveniences. They have become infernos that destroy entire towns in hours, with temperatures and speeds we've never seen before. Floods that used to be called once-in-a-century disasters are now recurring every few years, washing through cities, submerging homes, and leaving people bewildered at the sheer force of water where it doesn't belong. Earthquakes are awakening in fault lines once considered dormant, and glaciers that stood frozen for millennia are retreating year after year. It's not just happening in one place or through one element. Earth, fire, water, and air are all moving more fiercely, more unpredictably, more urgently. And here's where it all ties back to Cayce's warning. This isn't random. This is patterned. What if these aren't simply natural disasters, but spiritual indicators, signs that the earth is mirroring the collective imbalance of its people? What if the floods and fires are the way our planet is responding to our disconnection, our unawareness, our neglect of deeper truths? Cayce's message was never about fear, it was about awareness. He spoke of the earth as alive, not just physically but spiritually, and that it responds to the condition of our hearts, our thoughts, and our actions. The more we turn away from compassion, from purpose, from unity, the more the earth groans under the weight of that spiritual disconnection. And so, when we see these growing patterns of climate chaos, social division, and environmental collapse, we must ask ourselves, are we witnessing the very sequence Cayce described? Are we already in the middle of it, not at the final act, but somewhere close to the tipping point? Because if that's true, then waiting for the big event is the wrong approach. The awakening must begin now in these early warnings. Number 8. A call to awakening. Edgar Cayce never delivered his prophecies as predictions of doom written in stone. His words were always a call to responsibility, a reminder that the future is not a sentence, but a decision. One of the most powerful things he ever said was, "There is no such thing as a future that cannot be changed." Think about that for a moment. What does it really mean to you? In a world where so many feel overwhelmed by global crises, where natural disasters seem more frequent and intense, and where the future often feels uncertain, Cayce's message brings back the one thing many of us forget we still have: choice. The storms, the rising seas, the trembling ground, these are not punishments from an angry planet or signs of an unstoppable fate. Cayce saw them as reflections of our collective inner condition, as the earth responding to what we, as a people, have chosen to value and ignore. He believed the earth doesn't lash out, it responds. It responds to our intentions, our awareness, our alignment with deeper spiritual truths. So rather than fearing what's to come, the real question we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of future are we choosing with the way we live, think, and treat one another today? When Cayce spoke of a path forward, he didn't point to politics or technology as the solution. Instead, he spoke of something far more personal and accessible: the human heart. The way back, he said, begins within, with humility, with the courage to acknowledge how far we've drifted from our moral and spiritual compass, and with the willingness to return to a place of reverence. It's not about rejecting science or solutions, it's about grounding those efforts in wisdom, compassion, and a sincere relationship with the Creator. If the soul is the cause of imbalance, then the soul must also be the cure. When we choose gratitude over greed, service over self-interest, and faith over fear, something shifts not just in us, but in the world around us. The earth, Cayce believed, responds to the soul. So when the soul finds its way back home, nature follows. Floodwaters don't rise to destroy, they rise to stir something within us. Earthquakes don't shake us because of wrath, they shake us awake, trying to get us to feel again, to listen again, to remember what truly matters. And so, as we stand in this moment, surrounded by both warnings and opportunities, we must ask ourselves, are we approaching life as victims of prophecy or as stewards of possibility? Because this isn't the end, it's the turning point. And every small act of love, integrity, and spiritual clarity contributes to a new direction, one where healing can replace harm and consciousness can calm the chaos. The future isn't decided by a prophecy, it's shaped by presence. And you, right now, are part of that shaping. So let this message settle into your heart, not with fear, but with power. The earth is not asking us to be perfect. It's asking us to return, to remember, to choose differently, and to live from a place of connection and care. The choice is still ours. What will you choose, not just for yourself, but for the world we all share? As we've seen, Edgar Cayce's prophecies are not simply about disaster. They are a mirror, reflecting the deeper truth of our spiritual disconnection and our urgent need to realign with nature, compassion, and wisdom. The question is not when the earth will change, but how we will respond. Will we meet these signs with fear or with awareness? The future is not fixed, it is still being shaped by our choices, and each of us holds a piece of that responsibility. If this message resonated with you, let it be more than just a moment of reflection. Let it be a turning point. Thank you for walking this path with us on the journey of wisdom. If you found value in today's video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming episodes, each one designed to bring clarity, connection, and spiritual insight for the world we're all creating together. Until next time, may your steps be mindful, your heart be open, and your spirit stay aligned with truth. Be well.